Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely demystify a classic, major 6-mark economics proof, deriving the short-run supply curve under perfect competition. If you've ever stared at a complex, double-panel graph and felt totally overwhelmed, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're breaking down the precise behavior of a perfectly competitive firm and mapping out exactly how its supply curve is born.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the core economic logic, move into the curve intersections, do the final derivation, and wrap it all up with the golden rule.
All right, part one, core economic logic.
So, at its simplest, a firm's supply curve just tracks exactly what quantity a producer is actually willing to sell when market prices change. Now remember, under perfect competition, a single firm can't influence the market price at all. They are what we call a pure price taker. Because of this, and this is a really key point, their demand curve is perfectly elastic. That means price equals average revenue, which equals marginal revenue. So the firm's only real decision, figuring out exactly how much to produce at that given fixed price.
This means a firm's output is totally dictated by some very specific profit maximization conditions. They're looking for that precise sweet spot where short-run marginal cost, or SMC, perfectly equals marginal revenue, average revenue, and price. And here's the kicker. The firm absolutely must at least be covering its average variable cost. It's just a matter of sheer survival, right? If average revenue drops below that average variable cost, the firm simply can't survive and has to shut its doors.
Moving right along to part two, panel I, curve intersections. Let's put on our economic detective hats here. We're going to trace the firm's behavior, starting from price P0 and moving upwards to see how these abstract rules become a tangible reality. Take a look at those U-shaped cost curves. You've got the short-run average cost, or SAC, and the average variable cost, the AVC. See how they're being sliced right through by that upward-sloping short-run marginal cost curve, the SMC? Meanwhile, those horizontal lines you're seeing, those represent our various escalating market price levels.
So we start at the very bottom of the y-axis. What happens when the market price is remarkably low, down at P0? At this price level, that horizontal line represents both our average revenue zero and marginal revenue zero.
Now, what's absolutely crucial to grasp here is that at point E0, where the SMC cuts MR0 from below, the firm is only covering its variable costs. Think of it like a local coffee shop that makes just enough to buy its daily coffee beans, but has absolutely zero cash left over to pay the rent. Because P0 perfectly aligns with the exact minimum point of the average variable cost curve, any price drop below this line literally forces the firm to shut down entirely. Producing anything below P0 would just generate deeper, catastrophic losses. So E0 is strictly known as the shutdown point.
But as the market price shifts upward to P1, the firm's situation fundamentally changes. We're now moving up the marginal cost curve to a brand new equilibrium.
This comparison really highlights the shift. While E0 was all about mere survival, reaching this new equilibrium point, E1 allows the firm to finally cover all its costs. At price P1, the SMC curve cuts the minimum point of the short-run average cost curve, the SAC, and because average revenue now perfectly equals short-run average cost, the firm sits in a stable situation of no profit, no loss. In economics, we call this earning normal profits. E1 is our vital break-even point, giving us an increased output quantity of Q1.
Okay, but what if the price climbs even higher? What if it hits P2 and P3? This is where our perfectly competitive firm really starts to see the benefits of a booming market.
As we continue up that vertical axis to prices P2 and P3, the firm eagerly capitalizes on these higher prices by expanding output to Q2 and Q3. You can see the equilibrium points shift further up the SMC curve to E2 and E3. And because the price, and therefore the average revenue, is now noticeably higher than the short-run average cost curve, the firm finally hits the jackpot. It unlocks those highly coveted supernormal profits.
Which brings us to part 3, the final derivation.
I love this direct quote from our source material because it perfectly describes the mechanical process of translating our findings onto a standalone price-quantity axis. It says, by joining points E0, E1, E2, and E3 as shown separately in panel 2, we get the firm's short-run supply curve. We're essentially taking the precise decisions the firm made at each varying price level and isolating them into a pure, clean graph.
If you follow those horizontal dotted lines straight across from panel 1 over to panel 2, you can see how connecting those exact extracted coordinate points E0, E1, E2, and E3 visually creates a single upward sloping line labeled S. That line perfectly maps the varying quantities Q0, Q1, Q2, and Q3 against their respective prices. So, by simply tracing the firm's rational, profit-maximizing responses step by step, we have organically derived the firm's short-run supply curve entirely from scratch. Pretty cool, right?
And that leads us to our final section, Part 4, the Golden Rule. This right here is the ultimate blink-and-you-miss-it takeaway you absolutely must remember to lock in that 6-mark proof. The supply curve isn't just some arbitrary line drawn on a graph. No, it is quite literally the marginal cost curve itself. But, and this is a massive but, it is only the specific portion of the curve sitting safely above minimum average variable cost. Anything below that minimum AVC point, below E0, simply doesn't exist as supply. Because remember, at that point, the firm shuts down and produces absolute zero. So, we've perfectly mapped the short run. But while this explainer firmly proves exactly how the firm behaves right now, it leaves us with a really provocative question. If perfectly competitive firms can earn these massive supernormal profits at points like E2 and E3, and there is completely free entry into this market, what happens when new competitors see those profits acting like a giant neon beacon and rush in? How will that flood of new supply alter this entire equilibrium in the long run? It's something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me today to unlock this fascinating economic proof.